think I should have sat closer. It was a long walk from over there. I'm like winded. Just shows you how out of shape I am. I mean, circles of shape. But anyway, go ahead and turn your Bibles to Esther chapter 1. Esther chapter 1. I was telling the Sunday school class that I'd got a new Bible, and it's a Charles Spurgeon Bible, and it's got like some of his notes and stuff in it and whatnot. But my old Bible has thumb tabs. And apparently, since I began using thumb tabs, I forgot where every book of the Bible is except Genesis, because I still can't find Revelation even because there's all those notes. So it's like you can't even just turn to the back, you know. So I flipped back to the thumb tab Bible for tonight because I just didn't want to risk it, you know. I have a reputation as a serious Bible scholar to uphold, so, you know. You may have noticed my wife is not here. Unfortunately, just before, as we were preparing to come, she got a call that the woman who was basically her grandmother, is on her deathbed. And so she was obviously distraught. So I said, well, you know, stay home. It's better than crying more than usual when I speak. So that's where she is tonight. So pray for her and her family. Last year I taught a lesson while the youth group was on the youth trip on having expectations for our children. And surprisingly enough, it actually kind of caused a little bit of a stir, I guess I would say. Not a stir as in Wally Jr., but a stir as in, I don't know, whatever else that is. So people talked to me after about how they watched it, some of them watching it weeks later, and I've really never gotten such a response from one of my messages at church. And at the same time, I can honestly say I've never gotten so many angry looks from people or comments after the fact about a message either. So apparently I really struck a nerve with that one. So, you know, my bad, I guess. When I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, you know, I always have like dozens of sermon ideas for when I speak in big church over the summer. And so I thought, well, I don't want to talk about that one. That'll upset some people. And I don't want to talk about that one. That'll upset some people. And then I was like, wait a minute. People aren't going to like what I have to say anyway. So let's try to go the opposite direction. Let's try to do one that's going to really upset people. So I figured, why not? I mean, some of you I've known for like 12 years. And you don't like me. So, you know, it's not like it's going to get better, right? So, yeah. So, the title of tonight's lesson, tonight's message is, Dear Christian, did you blow it? Dear Christian, did you blow it? So we're in Esther chapter 1. And while you're turning there, just by a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the piece of farm equipment known as a bush hog? Okay, all right. So if you're not familiar with it, what a bush hog is it's something that you drag behind your tractor, and it's basically a huge lawnmower. But it's the type that doesn't make pretty grass, right? Like the one you have under your riding mower or whatever. This one you can actually run over like bushes and honeysuckle and stuff. And mine is probably about as wide as this thing here. So it's a pretty big piece of equipment that sits behind your tractor. It's got a heavy steel body to it, and you hook it up to what's known as PTO, which is power takeoff out of the back of the tractor. It's basically just a spinning rod, you know. And so that spinning rod that runs down into a gearbox, which operates this very large blade, like, you know, the kind of blade that you could run over small children with or whatever, right? I'm just kidding. But yeah. Anyway, how? Raise your hand if you know what a shear pin is. Anybody in here know what a shear pin is? Okay, less people know what a shear pin is. All right. So what happens is this shaft goes down and it goes into a gearbox, and the whole thing is connected by this thing called a shear pin. And what it's designed to do is it's basically designed to brake in case you hit something too big with the mower, like a child. No, I'm just kidding. Like a tree stump, right? Or a rock or something like that. What happens is the force that's being generated is so great that if you hit something and it pushes back, in order to keep it from basically ripping the guts out of your tractor, the shear pin is designed to break. Now, why am I pointing all this out? Because the book of Esther is a lot like my bush hog, in the sense that if you look at it, it's this big thing. But there is a very, very small part in it that if it's not there, nothing works inside of it. Now, I figured this out one day when I had tried to use my bush hog and I was driving around for a while wondering, why is this not cutting anything? Well, because the shear pin had broke. And so what happens is the shaft spins, but it doesn't go into the gearbox, so it doesn't operate it and whatnot. If you were to look at the outside of that bush hog, the shear pin is like this big. It's really small. And in the same sense, the book of Esther, who the book is named after, she actually plays kind of a small role in the sense of not as many of the verses are actually from her point of view. In fact, there's really only 4 characters in the book of Esther. There's Haman, Mordecai, the king, and Esther. And on sheer volume, Esther probably has the least amount of verses devoted to her of all the characters. Now, I didn't do a true math, of counting each verse up and stuff, but nothing in the story works without Esther. Just like that shear pin. In fact, just like the shear pin, everything in the story of Esther is riding on Esther's shoulders. And we're going to learn about that tonight. But in order for us to get some understanding of this, I want to point out that there is a biblical principle for life found in the book of Esther that frankly most people overlook. But in order for us to understand this principle, we must first understand a bit about her situation. Look at Esther chapter 1. We'll start reading just verses 10 through 12. We're going to jump around a little bit because obviously we don't have time to read the whole book. So here we're going to learn a little bit about the old queen. Book of Esther chapter 1, verse number 10. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, that's a fancy way of saying he was drunk, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbana, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 chamberlains that served in his presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains, wherefore the king was very wroth and his anger burned in him. So we see right here, what's happening is the king's having a big party. And we're going to find out a little bit more about the king, but if there's one word to define this king, it would probably be sociopath. This man was not a healthy person. And we're going to read a couple of things that he wrote in a little bit. This guy, this king, okay? This guy was crazy, all right? But what we get from this story is he calls his wife to come to him in this party. Why? Because he values her opinion. Wait, that's not right. Because he wants to show her off to all of his buddies. And so he calls her out and she doesn't come. And so the king, having never been disappointed in life apparently, is very upset by all this. All right, so now what happens? So look at Esther chapter 1. We'll pick up in verse 16. And Memucan answered before the king, and Princess Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but to all the princes and to all the people that are in the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. Now, the king, in all of his infinite wisdom, went to his buddies who saw him get embarrassed, and he said, what should we do about this? And this guy says, whoa, look, king, she didn't just insult you as a man. He's going to go on and say, she insulted all men. Okay, let's see what he has to say. Verse 17, for this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they I can't even say it without laughing, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti, the queen, to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the lady of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which has heard of the deed of the queen. Thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And there you can read, will come when she's called. That's what this is all about. And so, again, here we have another example of a person who seeks counsel from a group of people who shouldn't be giving counsel. And their counsel is, well, hey, listen, we've got a real problem on our hands. I mean, you called her and she didn't come. And so what this guy's thinking is, what's going to happen when I go home? I'm going to call my wife and she's not going to come. And she's going to say, well, Vashti didn't come when the king called her. And then all of civilization, it's all going to break apart, king. It's going to be pandemonium, Thunderdome. What are we going to do? Well, the only solution is we got to fire this woman. And then we'll put somebody in her place who will come when she's called. And so we begin to lay the foundation for how Esther sort of comes onto the screen here. Look at Esther chapter 2. So now the king is going to decide to look for a new wife. Esther chapter 2, we'll read verses 1 through 4. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, under the custody of, I don't know how you pronounce this, it's Hegi, I guess, maybe, or Hegi, the king chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them, and let the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. So now here we have this guy who is the ultimate power in basically the empire of the Persians and the Medes, and he decides he's going to have himself a beauty contest. But when we think about a beauty contest, we think about these people who, for some reason, they have all these competitions all throughout the states, and then, they go to the Miss America pageant or whatever. The problem with this beauty contest is it was not voluntary. Here's what happened. The king appointed officers to go out through all the land, and the orders were pretty clear. Hey, you see a pretty girl? Throw her in the back of this cart and bring her here. And then we're going to put her in this house full of all these other pretty girls. And then when I decide which one I want, I'm going to take her. Am I wrong? I mean, that's pretty much how this was. This wasn't a voluntary sort of thing. And I would put it this way. I've heard people say the book of Esther is a love story. I find that kind of interesting because any man who has a daughter would not want your daughter in this situation. No, you really wouldn't. A love story, you'd think, okay, I despise this man who's going to win my daughter's heart because I'm a man, I'm a father, I'm supposed to. But at least this guy will take care of her and love her and try to do right by her, right? No, this guy's a sociopath, a psychopath, and we'll see that in just a minute. This is not the kind of thing, not only that, just think about it. If you win, that's what you win. You win that guy. The guy who started this whole thing just because he called his wife and she didn't come, all right? So clearly not the type of person that you'd bring home for dinner, right? I mean, it's probably a pretty strange fellow. Also notice that the king was looking for virgins, so he had a specific age group in mind. Okay? So, and as I said, and whoever won this beauty contest got as her prize this king, who, if we read on, we discover was probably a drunk. He had a foul temper, and he was more than likely a sociopath. Kings like Ahasuerus were not good people. In fact, historians believe that Ahasuerus is another name for the Persian king Xerxes. Here is a historical account of this king taken from the book Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. I quote from his book, "When Xerxes, the Persian emperor, crossed the Hellespont River during his invasion of Greece, the waters surged up and destroyed the bridges his engineers had spent days building. And so he threw chains." This is how he handles disappointment. "And so he threw chains into the river, ordered it to be given 300 lashes, and branded it with hot irons. As his men delivered his punishment, they were ordered to harangue it with these words, 'You salt and bitter stream, your master lays this punishment upon you for injuring him who never injured you.' Oh, and he cut the heads off the men who built the bridges." So yeah, this guy is not playing with a full deck of cards. He's a pretty strange fellow. Not only that, then it goes on to say Herodotus, the great historian, called the display presumptuous, which is probably an understatement. Surely preposterous and delusional are more appropriate. Then again, it was part of his personality. Shortly before this, Xerxes had written a letter to a nearby mountain in which he needed to cut a canal. He says, quote, "You may be tall and proud," he wrote, "but you don't dare cause me any trouble, otherwise I'll topple you into the sea." So this guy who decides to build a bridge across a river to invade another country The river knocks his bridges down, and the guy is so intelligent, he thinks, let's put some hot iron together and throw it into the water. That'll teach that river who's boss. This was the man that Esther wins if she wins this beauty contest. So again, we can see this is why in the book of Nehemiah, when Nehemiah says, I was sad for the first time, this is why the Bible says he was very sore afraid. Because the man that he served with every day was not his friend, was not even a good person. The man was probably a murderer, a killer, not good people, right? So, the thing is, you don't get very sore afraid when your boss is a normal, functioning, well-adjusted adult. You get that sort of afraid when you've seen them flipped out and do ghastly things to people. But the principle that we're looking at tonight, that Esther teaches us, is found in Esther chapter 4. Skip ahead to Esther chapter 4. Esther chapter 4 and verse number 13. Esther chapter 4, verse 13. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shalt there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Okay, so we'll stop here for just a second. So what has happened here now is that Mordecai has basically picked this fight out of his own pride and arrogance with Haman, who is another proud and arrogant person. Basically now Mordecai is backed up against a wall. He has no options, and he has to go to Esther. Now, if we were to read this, and again, we won't for the sake of time, we'll find that now at this place in the contest, Esther's sort of under heavy guard. And the men who are responsible for guarding her, history tells us, were all likely eunuchs, because the king couldn't have anybody there to take advantage of, working with ladies all day, right? So this woman is under house arrest, essentially, and Mordecai can't even go and see her. So what they have to do is they have to communicate via messenger. And so Mordecai gives her all this. Now, the thing about this is, I know, some people, how you perceive things is a big part of who you are. I get that. I read this here, and I think personally, this is Mordecai's lowest point that he sinks to in all of the Bible. Now, many people focus on, and rightly so, the last part of that sentence or paragraph in verse 14, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That's true. Maybe that is why Esther is there. Maybe that is why. But here's the other flip side of that. Mordecai picked this fight with this guy all because he wouldn't bow to a rightful authority. And that's really about what it all comes down to. Haman wouldn't let this go, despite Haman having all sorts of things in Haman's favor. He wouldn't let this go. And so Mordecai is completely without options, and he goes to Esther. And notice what he says there, in verse number 13, Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. I mean, in a way, Mordecai sort of forgets her whole circumstance, doesn't he? It seems to me, at least from my perspective, Mordecai forgets her whole circumstance. She didn't run to the king's house willingly. She's there as basically a prisoner. Mordecai picked this whole mess, and now he's coming to her saying, listen, you got to bail me out. Now, this is Sandersology, if I can borrow that expression. I personally think if Haman just decided to kill Mordecai, God would have said, all right. The issue was that Haman decided he would kill all of the Jews for what Mordecai had done, and God says, nope, that's not going to happen, because the Jews are my responsibility. Now, that's just my opinion. But I think that if Haman had just decided Mordecai had done this thing, Mordecai was probably in the wrong. Nobody told Mordecai, you can't worship the Lord, you can't do this, you got to worship this man. It wasn't like that at all. There was this bitter feud that Haman had with the Jews from hundreds of years ago. But the point is that all this stuff falls on Esther. And notice what Esther does in verse number 15. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan. Shushan was the name of the city that they lived in. And fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. The principle that's found in verse number 16 is this. No matter what situation in life we find ourselves, we must always focus on what we can do, not on what we can't do or what we can't control. Esther does that, and did you see it there? In fact, Esther's wisdom in this situation is made all the more powerful by this fact. Of all of the people in the story, she has the least liberty and the least freedom. Did you notice that? I mean, think about it. You got the king, who nobody can tell the king what to do, not even rivers and mountains, apparently. Then you got Haman, who was basically like the king's right-hand man. And we won't turn there, but if we were to read, we'd find, if you study this out, you discover Haman basically set up a price to the king and said, I'm going to kill all the Jews, and if you let me do it, I'll give you all this money. Haman was rolling in money. I mean, Haman was ridiculously wealthy. And so he sets up this whole thing. He's got all this. He's got kids. He's got a wife. And he goes in one part of the scripture, he tells all this stuff that he's got going on in his life. And you know what he says? But this one thing I lack, and that is that Mordecai won't bow to me. And so, again, you have the king with complete authority and complete freedom. You have Haman with near complete authority and near freedom. And then you have Mordecai, who at the very least is somewhat associated with the king. We're not told early on exactly what his role is, but we know he goes in and out of the king's household. So another man with freedom, and this whole problem has been caused by these three fellas, and it falls to the one lady who has the least freedom of all of them. And what does she do? She says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fast for 3 days, and then I'm going to go to the king. And if I die, I die. Now, why is this important? Because the thing is that she doesn't just understand that she has one shot at making this request to the king. She also knows that before that, she can do one other thing. There is only one other, so she knows she's only got one shot. So what she says is I'm going to wait 3 days to take my one shot at this. And what I'm going to do in those 3 days is the one thing that I can do as a basic prisoner, I'm going to fast. Which is another way of saying I'm going to spend 3 days trying to get the Lord's attention before I go and do this thing. A woman with almost no freedom says, but I can do this. And then she says to Mordecai, will you ask the other Jews to do this with me? And then she does it. Now, to me, that's pretty important. Now, not only that, though, if you'll notice, she's not doing this out of some kind of silly, sense of optimism. Did you notice that? She's not going in saying, hey, look, nothing bad's going to happen. No, she knows what's at stake here. You see, that is one of the flaws with what I would call like this almost hyper-optimistic sense of things is that when you delude yourself into thinking nothing bad can happen because you're thinking on the positive side, you're not really preparing yourself for life. That doesn't mean you need to dwell on the negative of everything, but at the same time, Esther here clearly tells us, well, there's a lot at stake here. But again, remember, this is the same guy who beat the river and cut off the head of the engineers who tried to build a bridge. So she knows, hey, if I go in and I call to the king and he doesn't lift his scepter, I'm dead. But she says, but I get one shot, so I'm going to take it. I'm going to do the one thing. Did you notice that back when Pastor was looking at Nehemiah, the same thing happened in Nehemiah's life? When the king says to Nehemiah, Nehemiah, why are you sad? Nehemiah responds back, why shouldn't I be sad? And I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Why shouldn't I be sad? The walls of my home are broken down, the city's in rubble. And the king says, what would you have me do? Nehemiah has one chance, one shot. Now, it's different for Nehemiah even, because Nehemiah has one shot, but no time. Nehemiah can't say, king, wait, hold that thought for 3 days. I'm going to go back here, and then I'm going to come back and tell you what I want you to do. No, But what does the Bible say that he does? He prayed. He thought, I only get one shot at this. And so it's one thing to say, I only get one shot at this and I'm going to take it. But it's another thing to say, I only get one shot at this. I'm going to shut my mouth long enough to pray and then I'm going to ask. Because think about it. How long does it really take? Nehemiah can't go home and plan. He can't ask for more time. He can't take a moment to collect his thoughts, seek advice, or seek counsel, but he can pray. And even a prayer as simple as, Lord, please help me, protect me, guide my mouth, and open his heart. How long does that take? The space of a thought. Nehemiah, even in that moment, who, frankly, if we were to really think about it, Nehemiah was little more than a prisoner. Newsflash, you can't just decide one day, hey, you know what? I don't want to be the king's cupbearer anymore. It's highly likely that I might die in this job. You know why you're the king cupbearer? I mean, you were probably a good-looking dude because the king didn't want ugly people around him. But you were expendable. That's why the king's sons weren't the king's cupbearer. Right? So you think like, you're not there because you earned the position. Oh, this guy drinks wine better than anybody I've ever seen. No, you're there because you're basically like the canary that tests out to see if something is bad before the boss does. Right? It's a good job because you're eating all the best food as long as there's no poison in it. Until there's poison in it, and it's not the best job anymore, right? You see, Nehemiah was basically little more than a prisoner himself. He didn't have a lot of options, but he had one shot, and he prayed, and then he took it. And he did what he could. Go ahead and turn into Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14. Esther teaches us this very valuable lesson. And that is that in our life, any time that we spend worrying about or thinking about or acting on things that we cannot control or we cannot change is literally a waste of our life. Esther had very little freedom, very little liberty. And what's so great about her story is the little bit that she had was exactly what was needed to change that entire story. But it all came with her saying, because think about it, if you were in Esther's shoes, you mean to tell me you wouldn't be tempted to complain and think, Mordecai, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? All you had to do, Mordecai, was just bow to this guy. That's it. But you couldn't do it. You couldn't just go along with it. No, you had to pick this fight. I'm here, frankly, not me, but she's here because she's pretty, which I'm not, right? But it's like, I didn't do any of this. I didn't cause any of this problem, Mordecai, and you come to me, but that's not how she handled it, was she? No. She said, okay, I got one shot. I'm in this position, I got one shot. We'll take 3 days, we'll fast, try to get the Lord's attention, and then we're going to take it. We'll see what happens. Look at Mark chapter 14. In verse number 3, and being in Bethany, the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious, and she brake the box and poured it on his head. And there were some that had indignation within themselves and said, why was this waste of ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence and have been given to the poor. And they murmured against her. And Jesus said, let her alone. Why trouble ye her? She hath wrought a good work on me. For ye have the poor with you always, and whensoever ye will, ye may do to them, but me ye have not always. She hath done what she could. She has come aforehand to anoint my body to the burying. Look at back a couple pages to Mark chapter 12. Mark chapter 12. We already talked about it in Esther. We saw it in Nehemiah. Now we see it here in the New Testament. This is a principle all throughout the Bible, that God praises us for doing what we can. Not what we can't do, and certainly not complaining. We know the Bible's very clear about complaining. And let me just tell you, I'm not only a member, I'm the president. I do it all the time. But I'm just saying, Esther had a lot to complain about, but she didn't. She focused on what she could do, and she did what she could do. Mark chapter 12, verses 41 through 44. And Jesus sat over against the treasury, and behold, how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and said unto them, verily I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast into their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. Why? Why did God remember this lady in the Bible for all of eternity? Because she did what she could. Because she did what she could. Why does the good steward, say, to the faithful servant, what does he say? Well done, my good and faithful servant, right? Because, why? He did what he could. The one guy who didn't do what he could is the guy who got punished, right? You see, again, it's a principle all throughout the Bible. Every place that we focus on what we can do and we forget everything that we can't do. Now, there's no doubt that these have been strange and trying times for our nation, although I would argue that objectively these times have not been that bad. Admittedly, some were out of work, and I know that's hard. I'm not downplaying that. But I mean, in all honesty, consider the COVID stuff. If you made a chart of human suffering throughout history, where would you put COVID? I'm just being honest. Now, this is one of the issues with preaching or teaching anything, and that is that people tend to think about what they think you meant and not what you said. So what that means is some people here think we shouldn't take COVID seriously. Didn't say that. Some people are saying, well, you're fine with the government doing what it's doing. Didn't say that. All I'm saying is that if we were to sit down and truly think about human suffering over the course of history, COVID would probably not be that big of a deal. We were all told to stay home in a day and age when there's Netflix and Amazon Prime. It's not that bad, right? Not that bad, I do find it amazing. I talk to people and some guy would say, I can't get my hair cut. I think, what? Like we're all walking around with those Easter Island heads on our shoulders anyway. It doesn't get that much better with a haircut, right? Come on. But the point is that does it really compare with things like the invasion of Genghis Khan, the sacking of Rome, the bubonic plague, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, or Auschwitz? Now here we are to the part of this message where it gets us angry. The part where people judge what they think I mean and not what I say. If I say, you know what, I don't think masks are that big of a deal. I don't. People say, wait, so you like masks? Or you're a sheep? Or you're ready to just get in a train car bound to Auschwitz? No, I just don't think masks are that big of a deal. That's really all I'm saying. I just don't. Now, can I tell you honestly, can my humanity be on display for you for just a moment? There was a time I did. And again, I'm saying this in front of God and pastor and everybody. When I first heard about the thermometer and the masks, I thought, nope, not doing it. Nope, I'm not. I know, none of you thought that, but I'm a bad person. So I thought, I'm not doing that. And then one day, I was reading in Romans and I came across these verses. You don't have to turn there, but it says in Romans 15, 1-3, we then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. Let every one of us please his neighbor for his good to edification. For even Christ pleased not himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of them that reproached thee fell on me. In prayer, I could almost hear the Lord speaking to me mockingly saying, Jeremy, seriously, this is the hill you're going to die on? Masks? It's like, get it together, son. It's masks. But it's like, wait, Lord, no, nobody can tell me. Wait, seriously? Hang on. The world outside is eating itself alive. And the question for us is, as we close, are we being different? Or are we handling these situations just like the world is? A little quiet there. That's really the question. Because, you say, but Jeremy, what about this? Can you control it? The government said don't go outside for a while. Can you control that? No. You can vote, and I highly recommend you vote. Every Christian should vote, right? Is it voting the lesser of two evils? Almost always it is. Okay. I still recommend you do what you can. Do that. Can I just tell you my personal opinion, pure opinion? Protests and marches are just about the biggest waste of time. I know that's not popular. It doesn't matter if it's the Promise Keepers March or the Million Man March or, the Me Too movement or even if it's Black Lives Matter. Listen, you want to do something? Then march and go make your community better. Plant some gardens. At least then you'd have tangible something for all of your effort. But we don't. Why do I say that? Because Christians do the same thing. We spend most of our time marching and not much time doing anything. We look around and we think, oh, all of this injustice. Really? What will you do about it? What can you do? I was at the gas station. I told my Sunday school class this. I was at the gas station during the quarantine. Gas was super cheap. I was looking for a tanker. I was going to fill up a tanker and just store it at the farm because I thought eventually it's not going to be this cheap anymore. So I go to the gas station and there's this guy there and I can tell he doesn't have any gas. And I thought, oh man, me again, always expecting the best in everybody. I thought, this guy probably drank his money away or whatever. And the Lord was like, Jeremy, don't be an idiot. That's how the Lord talks to me, probably because it filtered through my own vernacular. But, I think to myself, I need to go help this guy out. So I get some money out and I go up to him and I say, hey man, look, I heard, you're out of gas. Here's some money. And he's like, no, I can't take your money. I said, yeah, look, it's no problem, man. Everybody has hard times, just take it. And he says, no. He said, you know what, this is America. I tell you what, I do need the money. What had happened was his truck had lost its fuel line. This guy had a sweet truck. And I don't mean sweet like, hoopty with the hydraulics and it bounces. I mean like a 50s style truck. Now, admittedly, he had placed a beer keg in the back of the truck as a fuel tank. And the fuel line had worked itself loose. The guy was on his way to go to a job and work. He was a heavy machine operator. And so I said, hey man, look, here's some money. You know what he said? He's like, no, look, I won't take your charity, but I do have this pocket knife. And he said, will you trade me for it? And I said, I don't need your pocket knife. And he said, well, I can't take your money. So I gave him the pocket knife. And then you know what I thought? I thought, I'm going to talk to this man about the Lord for just a minute. Amen. And so I said, hey man, look, I can give you this money. You know why? Because God's been real good to me. God's been real good to me. The thing is that I could sit there and I could look around and think, oh, all this stuff got taken away from me. Or I could look at the guy right in front of me and say, hey man, God's been real good to me. Real good to me. Let's close with this. Turn to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. The numbering of verses is not part of the original text, obviously, but so I feel like I can say this. I'm not criticizing Scripture, but if I had one change to make with the numbering of the Bible, it would be this. In verse number 14, I would not have those two sentences on the same verse. I would have the first part be a verse all to itself. And here's why. The Bible tells us, ye are the light of the world. Amen. If we handle these situations that have come up in our lives, be it COVID, the quarantine, or Black Lives Matter, or all the riots or whatever, if we handle these situations just like the world does outside, then we are not that light. God commands us to be better, to handle these things better. That means when you're tempted to chew up some other Christian, when you look over at the youth group and you think, well, that kid's not being like he should, you should say to yourself, nope, because I'm the light of the world. The world chews up their young people. We should not do that. When somebody on social media doesn't agree with you and you think, well, I'm going to set them straight, think to yourself, no, I'm not, because the world does that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to behave that way. I will be different. Why? Because I can control me. What has been so sad about this is that the average Christian has handled these situations just like the world. And that's why the title of tonight's lesson is, Dear Christian, did you blow it? If I were to pull out my phone tonight and turn on the little flashlight that comes with it, you wouldn't see much of the flashlight because all the lights are on and everything. But if we turn the lights out, if we were to black these windows and I turned my light on, everybody could see the light pretty clearly. Why? Because the darker the surroundings, the better we see the light. Can I leave you with this thought? The world is not becoming a brighter place. It is not. I'm not saying that we are living in the end times or that maybe we're just living in the end times of America as a superpower. But I am saying that if things continue on, we can stop expecting the world to be a better place, a more hospitable place, or a place that's easier to witness in. And we can gripe about it, we can complain about it, or we can focus on what we can do. We can focus on our testimony, on the way our light shines in this world. And we can stop getting involved in all the petty disputes and everything else that's going on in the world around us, because they don't matter. Consider this. Now, am I saying, again, people, this is, you think this is what I mean. Am I saying these things don't matter at all? Of course not. Again, you should be active in your community. You should vote. You should be wise about things. No doubt about that. But even Christ came to this earth, and did you notice? He did not get involved in all of the social issues. Why? Because Christ said it himself. Why was he here? To seek and to save that which was lost. That was his job. All of these problems we have today, they existed back then. And Christ didn't come here to clean them up. Does that mean they're not important? Absolutely not. But we cannot get so embroiled in those things that we forget why we're here. We are here because we are the light of the world. That is why God has left us here. It is not to clean up all of this mess. Because think about it. What's the other verse, right? What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world but lose his own soul? What's the principle there? On an individual level, it's saying, well, you can seek for wealth and all this other stuff, but in the end, it's not going to help you. For us, that is, we could clean up all the messes in the world. We could fix the gender pay gap, and we could fix gender inequality. We could fix racism. And what good would it do if the world died and went to hell for it? Again, please don't walk away misunderstanding anything I've said. I am in no way saying those things don't matter. What I'm saying is we cannot allow ourselves to be down in the muck and the mire like the rest of the world when God has called us to something greater. The devil works in two ways. Number one, he deceives people. And number two, he distracts people. The devil is seriously hindered in his ability to deceive Christians. And so he must revert to distraction. And when we get embroiled in all of this stuff, that's a distraction. So the thing for us is not to think about all the stuff that's going on, but to think, what can I do? Who can I witness to? What can I work at? Who can I impact? How can I help? And in so doing, we can live up to the example that Esther laid out for us. Pastor Wally.